thank you for being here. And thank you to the St. John's Women's International Film Festival for hosting this panel, Storytelling Through Animation. So I'm Maral Mohammadian. I'm the producer, one of the producers at the National Film Board's animation studio. And I'm here with three directors, Catherine Lepage, Jordan Canning, and Robin McKenna. And all of your films happen to be in the Shorts Program 7, I believe, which is not the funniest program. And seeing the films, actually, your films in a pandemic adds a whole other dimension. I feel like you can say that about any work of art you see nowadays. So I do want to start with each of you about kind of if you could give us the context, because the context in which you made your work was very different than today's. And yet we see the film with different eyes now, which is really interesting. So before we get into it though, I'm just going to ask each of you to introduce yourselves and a little bit about your background, and we can start with you, Catherine.
Yeah, I'm Catherine Lepage, director of the Great Malaise. I'm an illustrator, author, and graphic designer. It's my first my first time trying animation, and it's my first film. So I'm new to that, but I usually make books, illustrated books. So that was the first step towards storytelling and exploring new ways.
We're going to get into that. It's wonderful. Thank you. Jordan?
Yeah, my name is Jordan Canning. I'm a filmmaker originally from St. John's, currently in my apartment in Toronto that I never leave. And I'm the writer and co-director of For North A. Animation is not my normal mode of storytelling either. I made a very different stop motion comedic film about 10 years ago, and everything else I've done has been live action. So this was a collaboration with Howie Shaw, who's an incredible animator here in Toronto. Yeah, it was a collaboration that the NFB helped facilitate, and that's kind of it.
Robin, hi.
Nice. And so I'm a documentary filmmaker, usually. I just released my first feature doc in the last couple of years called Gift. So yeah, for me also, this is my first experience in animation. It was a whole new language to learn, and it's kind of the opposite extreme from what I usually do, which is like observational documentary, where you're really just composing with the elements in front of you and trying to do your best with what's there. And this was really like starting from a blank page and imagining everything. So I had some amazing collaborators. It was a very collaborative process, and I worked with some beautiful artists. But yeah, it's kind of cool that it's an animation panel and we're all just finding our way in a new realm.
Well, that's exactly the place I'd love to start with, is that you've each kind of come to this work and kind of being open to this kind of work from very different ways. So Catherine, we're going to start with your film, Le Mal du siècle, The Great Malaise is the English title. And it's an adaptation. So the film is an adaptation of a combination of your published film books. Is that right?
Yeah.
So why did you decide to do a cinematic work with the books? And maybe we could just start with that.
Yeah, that's a good question. Maybe somehow I thought it would be easier to start with something that already existed. And I think that was a mistake, thinking that. But the film is based on 3 books that have been published. The first one came out in 2007, so it's more than 10 years ago. And back in the days where the book came out, Marcel Jean who is a producer at the NFB, who was a producer at the NFB back then, contacted me because he thought that the book was could be fun to make a film with. And the first book was a journal about the depression, just simple visuals, telling like visual metaphors, telling what it is to go through a depression on a very personal point of view. And at this moment, it never happened. We didn't make the film, but I think the idea stayed there. And then I made the other two books that still explore like dark emotions or anxiety and how do we respond to the pressure and this is like the zone I love to explore, like the dark sides we don't want to tell about. We try to keep inside. We don't want to show these parts. And that's what I think is interesting. And that's why I still wanted to make a film with that, because I thought it would be fun. Just as an illustrator, for me, was like a dream to, the next step was to make my drawings move. And I think that's the starting point of this adventure.
Mm-hmm. And what was it like to adapt the literary work? Like, the film is, for people who haven't seen it, it's a beautiful story about kind of keeping up appearances while dealing with the pressure of perfection, in this beautiful juxtaposition between what the narration says and feels versus the visual storytelling. And the graphic, the design comes from your books. So I assume there was no kind of visual or less visual development to do on the film. But what about the story? Did it change from the published writing in the books to the film narration? It did? It's
a whole new story. The three books had different tones, and I needed to find a new structure, a new way to make it all work together. And I didn't want to make just like the book into a film. I wanted it to be something new, but based on the same visuals. And I started up by picking the images I thought that would be fun to see how movement can add to them, how what happens if that picture moves. And so this is how I picked the images from the books. And from then, the hardest part was to find how to put them together on a timeline that makes sense. And I think I have I made something like 30 or 40 versions all along the way, moving it all, trying to find the good pacing. Well, that's it. Like the play between the writing and the design is so clever. How do you work? Did you sort of print the images and put them up on a wall and kind of do a paper edit? Or what's your process like to kind of find that nice orchestration between sound and image? Most of the time, well, I did print a storyboard with the images I really wanted to have in the film, and I wrote there's a voiceover on the film, so I wrote the voiceover, and sometimes I needed some more images. So there are images in the film that are not in the books. But the thing I did over and over was recording my own voice and just putting like on a timeline the voice and the images, and that's how I worked to feel how it all holds together on a timeline. I needed to see it because the images respond to what the person is saying. So that's how I worked.
Thank you. I think what we're going to do, it's really interesting that there's, I have some questions I want to ask you, but I would like all of you to answer. So I think what we'll do is kind of dive into each film, and then we'll pull back and chat about more about creative process and those kinds of things. So Robin, let's talk about Thanadoula. It's an animated documentary. And your first animation, as you said, and it was a real collaboration. Can you tell us the context? Like, where did the story come from?
So the film is the story of a woman called Natalie who loses her older sister, who's this kind of magical being. And through the loss of her sister, kind of finds her calling as someone who accompanies people who are dying. And I met Natalie. I was working on a film, a very long-term labor of love about ayahuasca, the visionary medicine from the Amazon, and doctors working with ayahuasca. So Dr. Gabor Mate in Vancouver. So I mentioned to her that I was working on that film, and she was like, Gabor Mate, I know him. He was my sister's doctor. I used to talk to him on the phone, and he was like no doctor I've ever talked to. So that's how she started telling me about her sister the first time I ever met her. It was just the first thing we started talking about. And she had a crow feather tattooed on her arm. And she started telling me about the meaning of the crow for her. As you know, the crow in different cultures has symbolized this kind of like trickster figure. And for her, it was like this idea of the messenger between the worlds of the living and the dying that kind of crosses back and forth between worlds. So it was like a very touching story that she told me, but also there was this element of almost kind of magic realism. And it was very intriguing to me as a documentary maker. Like, I just kept thinking about it and thinking about how I could convey that, the kind of poetry of her story. And that's where I thought about using animation, you know, in a realm that just could use a lot more imagination and create something kind of otherworldly, to create that feeling that's of being kind of between worlds.
Now, it took some time to find that that aesthetic, didn't it? It took a few years. Where did it start, and how did you know it wasn't right in the early stages?
Well, yeah, I just had a small grant. It started out as a Bravo Fact grant. And I have other friends who've done Bravo Facts who are like, oh yeah, they give you just enough to hang yourself with. So that's kind of what happened. It was like, I embarked on it. I had never worked in animation before. I was working with a great animator, Daniel Guys in Montreal, who works a lot in 3D. So we were doing a mix of 3D and kind of mixed media, 2D, but it was like, you know, 3D is very complicated and expensive, and it was pretty ambitious what we were trying to do. So we kind of developed it together, made the animatic, and then started getting into the animation, and kind of came to a point where it was like, there was no way we were going to achieve what we had started for the budget that we had. So meanwhile, I knew Yelena, your colleague at the NFB, who's a great kind of creator and producer of animation. And I had been talking to her about the project since the beginning, but it was kind of like we were talking about it over years, and kind of she was giving me feedback, and I would go back and kind of keep revising it. And I made my feature doc over the process of it. But finally, Yelena kind of felt like it was clicking, and she came on board as co-producer, and the NFB got involved. And so at that point, it was like, okay, we're basically gonna start all over again, and use a lot of the assets that we had created with Dan originally, like the backgrounds, but really take a different direction creatively, and kind of remix some of the stuff that we had created. but bringing the documentary aspect of the story much more to the forefront. So working with a lot of Natalie's family archival photos and home movies and her sister's journals, which were really had beautiful drawings. And then I would shoot some scenes with Natalie, which we then rotoscoped. So with some of like Dan's textures and original kind of design, we worked with Elise Simard, who's a very beautiful filmmaker who I had discovered early in the process. And I always felt like her work was like exactly in the vein of what we were trying to create. So it was like kind of remixing all these different materials that we had and rotoscoping, doing this new shooting, starting all over from scratch and creating something new and more kind of like feminine and mysterious in a way, I would say.
It's interesting to me that that you talk about having to go back to the documentary like material, the journals, the photographs, video. Was it an intentional decision at the beginning to kind of more fictionalize the story?
Well, I mean, I think it was partly working with Dan. It was just like that his strengths are like, he also comes from kind of an illustration background. And so we were using Natalie's voice and her story. But the visuals were all a world that was kind of created as opposed to documentary.
Great, thank you. So Jordan, you're known mostly for features and series. I would say primarily for comedy. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
So this is like the opposite of that.
Yeah.
So where did this story come about? Where is the story from? In terms, where did the writing come from, and what's the origins?
Yeah, it came originally from a sort of collection of stories that I had jotted down that my mother had told me kind of over the years. She just in passing, stories about when she was a little girl, spending her summers in rural Ontario on Amherst Island. And then a particular sort of, not a monologue, but she told me this experience once about sitting beside her dad's bedside when he was passing away. And I had this little folder in my computer called like Animals and Death or something. And it was just these sort of recurring images and moments with animals and death. And then this idea of the daughter and the father and, the idea of a parent, sort of trying to teach the child to, learn about death, accept death as a part of life, and prepare your child for being an adult and everything that painful that comes with that. But I didn't really know what it was. It sat in the folder for years and years. Sometimes I would open it up and think try to imagine what it would be like if I turned it into a short film or incorporated it somehow into a feature, but it never felt right. It always seemed like it would come across really saccharine or sort of, I just didn't think there was really a way to express it properly and convey what I was trying to do in live action. So it just sort of sat there for a while. And then years later, I think probably in 2015, maybe, I was in St. John's, and Annette Clark, who's a producer at the NFB, had asked me to give some notes on a short film script. And it was written by a great filmmaker in St. John's named Wanda Nolan, who's known for live action. But she had been paired up with an animator through the NFB, and they were making a short film that she had written and was going to direct in conjunction with this animator. And that was something that I didn't know the NFB did. I didn't really think I would ever have access to the NFB unless I had, some brilliant idea for a documentary, which I never will. So I was very kind of curious about that and chatted with Annette about this sort of meandering idea or set of ideas. And she said, well, go write a script. And so, yeah, I sort of sat down, and by then, this was, I don't even know how, almost 10 years after I'd been keeping this little folder. By then I had kind of been going through my own experience, caring for a loved one and spending a lot of time in a hospital. And, as I started to write this script, what it turned into was this sort of fantasy almost of, what if my mom and myself could have somehow crossed paths in the same hospital in these two moments in our lives when we were struggling and feeling very alone, and the comfort that could come in that. And so that's what it kind of morphed into, these two strangers finding this very small moment of connection in passing. So anyway, once I had a script and Annette liked it, and we set off to find an animator to team up with. And that was a very, I don't know if you guys, Kathleen, you're an artist and an illustrator, so you already knew the imagery you were going to be working with. But Robin, I don't know, when Annette first started saying, okay, well, what kind of animation is? I was like, I don't know. It was such an interesting experience to start to imagine what is this sort of blurry imagery that I had in my mind? What kind of textures or lines would I picture for it? And so I started to sort of watch a lot of animation and try to narrow down kind of what I was thinking, okay, well, it's definitely not like that, and it's not like that, maybe this. And then another great producer at the NFB, John Montez, sent a list of names, and Howie Shaws was on it. And John really was like, I think Howie would be pretty great for this. Howie's awesome, and check out his work. So I watched Howie's short, Bam, and a couple, basically as much work as I could get my hands on. And I loved it. And it was not at all what I ever would have pictured, really. If you forced me to try to bumble through a drawing of what I thought it would be like, Howie has a kind of almost, I describe it, and perhaps he would hate me for saying this, but it feels almost like a kind of graphic novel, comic book sort of vibe to it. It's beautiful, simple lines, a quite sort of, not flat, but like a selective color palette. But he was so good with characters and emotion, even in these sort of very, sort of simply rendered drawings, that it just, I don't know, it felt like maybe it could be good for the film. So we sent Howie the script, and he and I started talking. And very luckily for me, he was interested and available to team up. And so we just started working on it. Like, this was almost 5 years ago now. He was in Toronto and I was in St. John's at the time. So we didn't even meet for about a year. We just kept talking and sending images and references back and forth. And he would sort of start to draw the characters, and we would just we took a really long development period for this, because our lives were kind of in places that necessitated that. And the NFB was so sort of supportive and just kind of let us take the time we needed to really focus in on what the story was, and let it evolve over time, and put it aside, and then come back to it a few months later with fresh eyes and really hone in on what we were trying to tell with the story.
It's really interesting, like how important it is to find that common language when you're collaborating with someone who, you know, who's kind of in a different field than you are. And so I'm curious how much, like, were you using a lot of references? Were you sending imagery back and forth to each other? Was it about talking about the characters, or was it more moods and feelings with this film? Like, it's got such a beautiful aesthetic, as you say, and it's kind of two stories. You know, there's kind of the present time, and then there's the flashbacks, and they have a very, very different look and feel. So what was the, like, what were you sending back and forth? Were you talking about character? Were you talking about feelings, moods, colors?
Yeah. We talked, yeah, I mean, I think early on we sort of sent some images back and forth, but they were kind of paintings and, you know, just to get the conversation started, a little bit about palette. You know, ultimately, I think if we went back and looked at those references now, they would be really nothing like, you know, you see in the finished film, but they helped kind of guide the conversation and get it started. You know, I think one thing that was always very clear from the beginning was delineating the two worlds, was delineating the present hospital environment and the more alive, natural, more colorful, more breath world of these memories that she keeps dipping into. And, you know, that is everything from, you know, the palette of the hospital is much more sort of stark and, you know, a lot of straight lines, a lot of just very sort of, is very precise. And then when you go into the memory sequences, it's got this sort of like, almost like a motion blur, and more bright colors and pops of red and purples and greens, in the way that these memories are almost more alive than she's currently feeling in, you know, in the state that she's in. And we also talked a lot about the visceral experience of what it feels like in a hospital. The minutia of it, the almost like overbearing details of it that you sort of hone in on when you're waiting. You wait so much in a hospital and you're often alone waiting, and you just sort of, that's what I remember most, is just like taking in all of the different sounds. You know, it's like nobody could have talked to you for 2 hours, but you just feel like you hear every little, you know, cough and somebody talking and the ticking of a clock, and that sort of overbearing ambience was something we talked about, and the ways that we could express those little touches of details in the hospital, and ways to make her feel very alone and isolated, even though she's, you know, kind of in a crowded hospital waiting room. So yeah, it was more talking about that feeling and the way that, you know, details express themselves visually in the hospital world versus the memory world. Like the little detail of, you know, one of my favorite moments in the whole thing is just this really simple shot of like her laying a battery down, and it just rolls and dink, like hits a glass. Like it's not anything related to the story. It's just this little tiny detail, textural detail of the world. And then in the memories, those details kind of get stripped away, and or the in-between, the fat gets stripped away, those little in-between moments, and you're just sort of jumping between the most visceral, potent exclamation points of these memories that she's remembering, you know, sort of a sound or a feeling or whatever, but you can kind of jump between them because everything else in between has sort of faded away. So yeah, anyway, that was a kind of long-winded way of saying we had a lot of conversations, and I would say they were more based on story and character and feeling than sending specific references back. Because I loved Howie's style, and it never felt like we were going to stray too far from that. You know, I mean, we would create the characters in their own environment, but he has a specific Howie je ne sais quoi that I didn't want to like erase or anything.
By the way, this wasn't the first time you worked with Howie, was it? Didn't you make the Peggy Baker film together?
Nope, this is
no.
Never met him.
Amazing. Yeah. Okay, so thank you for that. I'd love to talk about the editing process now, and this is sort of for everyone, because in animation we work with animatics, which are sort of, you know, a version of a storyboard in motion in time that gets hopefully better and better and better as you make it, as it comes to life, as sound is added, etc., etc. And Catherine, you worked with an editor on your film, Sophie Leblond. Leblond, thank you. Maybe actually we could start with you. What was it like to work with an editor? I imagine it was a really different kind of an experience than a publishing editor. And did you work early on with her in assembling the structure, the pacing, things like that?
It's fun because she was my very first reference, the first person I sat with to discuss the project. Well, not exactly the first person, because I was already on board with NFB, but my producer, Marc Bertrand, told me that he could hire someone to help me. And he was thinking about someone in the book industry, but I asked a friend, because I don't know nothing about cinema, and I asked a friend if she would have an idea of someone who could work with me, and she suggested Sophie, because she knew how my books were like. It's not like a linear story. It's like all little scenes that are put together, and the editing gets really important. So that's why she suggested me to work with her. And so really early, she just helped me bounce ideas. And so when we were further in the process, we decided to hire her for editing, for the real editing of the film. But that was not the purpose at the beginning. She was just there to help me build the storyline. And I have to say that I worked a lot myself in the animatic, and I moved things all the time, and it was a struggle. And she came at a moment, and she didn't know what to do, and we were kind of lost. And it took a couple days, weeks, and she came back, and then she knew how to place the things. But you know, sometimes it's tiny details. And for example, she came up with the idea to have the title at the end. So you during the film, you're with this woman in her head. You're with her, and the title at the end takes you out, and it helps you see the problem in another perspective. Like for me, it's important that the subject of this film is not only a problem of one person at a time, but it became a society problem. So I think that simple idea to have the title at the end changed a lot. And so, yeah, she helped me, but at the same time, I think she was a little puzzled, because it's a strange film. And
what was it not working when you were puzzled? Was it the intention? Was it from an impact?
the dramatic
dramaturgy?
curve. Yeah, yeah. And sometimes if you see a scene too long, it's boring. But at the same time, at the beginning, it was really hard to understand because everything was going too fast. And then when we moved things, it just worked. So it's weird. It's hard to explain.
Well, it's a film kind of made of tableaus, and but there's this really creeping feeling of, you know, it sort of seems very straight and playful and sweet and innocent, and then very, very artfully it starts to get surreal, and then it starts to get absurd, and that emotional arc is really well crafted. So bravo, Sophie, and to you.
Yeah, it was the biggest struggle to find a way to put it all together, because we were animating. We had maybe 3/4 of the film animated, and I didn't have the final pacing yet. I had all the pieces, but you know, sometimes I heard an animation, sometimes you animate too much and then you have to cut, and it's heartbreaking because you spend so much time. That didn't happen to us because all the little tableau, as you say it, they were working. We just had to find where to put them. And yeah.
And Robin and Jordan, it's a kind of a question for both of you. I guess working mostly more in feature films, was it difficult to kind of compress into this poetic format? And so that's kind of one question. And also the second part is, in animation, I find it doesn't work until it really comes together. Like there's 1,000 little details that make it come to life. So was it difficult for you to know if it was working or not when you were looking at various edits, when it was still kind of in its raw form?
You want to start, Robin? Or
I can. Well, I actually started out making documentaries with this crazy show in Quebec, La Course Destination Monde, where young people travel around the world with the camera making short documentaries. So they were like these little documentary poems that were like 4 or 5 minutes that we had to make every 9 days. And it was like, I used to say it was kind of like a documentary haiku, you know, like I love that form of like something very essential and compressed. So I haven't really gone back to short films since then, but that's kind of how I started. So I like that short form. But in terms of the editing question, that's like, when I was working with Dan, it's something that stressed me out a lot because it was like, the animatic is supposed to be so precise. And it was like, what? Like I have to make all these choices and commit to them at the very beginning. And then I'm stuck with it. I'm like, I don't know. I mean, again, it's the opposite of documentary, which is so much like gathering intuitively, and you can kind of really cast your net wide, and then at the end you kind of have control in the edit over like what you're going to create, and you might find something totally different. You find the structure in the edit, So it was like having to know all the answers at the beginning. I was like, how are we going to do that? And because it's kind of a poetic and mysterious story, there were certain things that kind of the audience needed to understand, like the fact that she does this work, as a calling. That's her work. She sits with people who are dying. It's not just like she's with a family member. So it was like, how do we convey that without her actually saying it? We were trying to figure out how to say it visually. So we were trying to find the right structure for that. And that was a big challenge. So it was like, we were still kind of wrestling with these story questions as we were moving forward with the animatic. So it was like this feeling that like, we have to solve this problem, but we didn't really have the answer. And there was money in the budget for an editor, but mostly it was just me and Dan working together on the animatic at the beginning. And then once I started working with Yelena's background is as an editor, right? She was an editor before she became a producer. So I think that helps give us the freedom of like, she was like, oh, well, you never know for sure until the end. Like, she has a more kind of intuitive approach to it. And I think because we were working more with archives and a lot of material that already existed, it gave us more freedom to say, we can try things, we can experiment, and we can work more intuitively together. So the process became very different. Like, we did have the animatic that we had created, but we were like, sometimes Elise would take something and just play with pages from the journal and moving them around and creating something around that. And it was very kind of flowy, like everyone kind of took turns with the edit. And so in the end, we were able to be much more free, which was a huge relief. But I also did have an editor friend who worked on it a little bit on the story structure in the middle before the NFB came in, who helped me like take away a lot of pieces of narration that she felt didn't really belong there. And so a lot of people, you know, put a little spice into the recipe and it evolved. Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the things I'm very grateful for is the amount of time that Howie and I had with the material. It wasn't necessarily by design. You know, we started working on it, you know, around 5 years ago. We didn't work on it like every day or anything, but because there were these times where, you know, he had another baby and had to disappear for a while, or I had to disappear for a while. That really helped with the editing process, where we would come back to it and be like, okay, let's get back to this. And then we watch it and be like, oh my God, just lose that, obviously. Like, there used to be a mother character in it sitting at the other side of the bedside with the, I mean, that seems like it was years ago now that was there, but that was there in the animatic, you know, up until a certain point. The animatic, I think, originally was running like we probably cut 3 minutes, I think, out of it over, you know, over the years. And
that's a lot for a short.
Yeah, it was, you know, and then there were things that we added in, like there was always this sort of connector scene that never was quite working, or maybe I can't even remember now, maybe in the script there wasn't a connector scene, and whenever I'd watch I'd be like, that's too quick. She gets to that emotion too quickly. We need something in the middle. And we tried a few different things, and then, you know, Howie just out of the blue had this idea of sort of, we kept talking about how much, you know, in a hospital and when you're going through something difficult, distraction is like, you know, heroin. Like, what can I look at that isn't my own pain? So he came up with this great idea of just these very simple jump cut shots where it's just the back of her head, you know, and she's just like standing in front of a chip machine, standing in front of a painting, standing in front of the nursery ward, and she doesn't move, but all the backgrounds change. You just get this sense of like, God, she just wants to do anything but go back into that room. And that was a very late stage addition to the animatic that I think is like, it's one of my favorite parts of the film. And I think because we had so much freedom and there was never any pressure to like deliver anything, we just sort of were allowed to live our lives and make this film in the amount of time we needed. One thing I wanted to add, which I found really interesting as somebody who works in live action generally, was, you know, once we started animating, I mean, you get very attached to the animatic and you get very used to it. And then you start to work with animators and things start to come alive. And something I don't think I ever really considered very deeply until I was faced with it was like the performance of the animation. And, you know, there were lots of discussions around this, like how her body language and things like that. And some of them came together very kind of naturally and organically. But then there were other moments that, you know, for example, there's a scene near the end where she's crying, and it never would have occurred to me to be like, oh, but how does she cry? How do we draw her crying? What kind of crying is it? How much does her shoulder shake? Do we hear her crying, or is it just music? What kind of, you know, all of those little details that, as someone who generally works with human beings, are like, oh, well, I cast that actor and the actor will bring their little spark to it and then I'll tweak it. But no, like you said, you have to commit to this. And so you really do have to think about that so deeply. And we were very lucky. We actually, for a couple of these crucial moments, one of our animators actually drew sort of different variations of these moments so that we could see them in context and know what was working, if it was too much or not enough. So that was something I really loved, and yeah, never would have, didn't think about.
Animators are actors.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, like, can we talk about the impact of your film and just of each of your films? I mean, they are each just beautiful films about terrible pain, you know, in different ways. Catherine, your premiere, your film's been kind of on the scene the longest. I think it premiered at Berlin in February.
Yeah.
That's right. Okay.
Yeah.
And it just won an award in Calgary. Congratulations, Best Animation Short in Calgary.
Yeah, thank you.
That's, you know, it's amazing. First film. It's resonating with people. So how do you, and Jordan and Robin, your films both premiere at the Ottawa International Animation Festival, Thanadoula tonight, and
we premiered at Tiff 2 weeks ago. Actually.
You premiered at Tiff, excuse me, of course, yes. Tiff loves Howie and loves your work as well. So congratulations, both of you. So we're recording this on September 24th, and the St. John's Festival audience is going to be watching it at the start of that festival on October 14th. So I'm curious to know from all of you, how has this life circumstances that we're in at the moment, has that changed your own view of your work, of this film? What's your relationship to it now? I mean, it's so relevant. I mean, that, you know, each of them are profoundly relevant, even more so now. So I'm curious how you feel about your own work, sitting where you're sitting right now, first of all. And maybe Catherine, you could start.
Yeah. I just want to say that I feel bad for both of you, because you will not be able to see how people react to your film. You won't be able to see it on the big screen. And I realized how lucky I am to have the premiere in February, just like days before the lockdown. And for me, as it was my first film, I really wanted to see how the people react, where they laugh, because yes, it's a dark subject, but I think the people laugh a lot because at the beginning you don't know that it's sad, and that's okay. That's what I want. I want people to laugh and not to think that it's going to get dark. And,
but even at the end, that you laugh at yourself, so it's you laugh while you're crying.
Yeah, that's one thing I discovered, that people laugh all the way. And when I was working on the film, for me, there was a breaking point somewhere in the middle where people would stop laughing, and I discovered, like, oh, okay, they still laugh. Okay, that's good. It's fun. And now, when the lockdown happened, I kind of forgot about the film, and not much happened until now. And I just looked at my film like an hour ago, and it was like, I haven't watched it since March, and I didn't want to look at it. I was like, oh, I don't feel comfortable looking at it anymore. But it's okay. I still I looked at it, and it's okay. I'm still okay with it. But the situation now is quite different from the context when I made the film. And I was afraid that this topic would be too heavy for people to enjoy it now. But I don't know, maybe at the same time it's relevant because some people experience anxiety now and they haven't experienced it before. Or they think about changing some parts of their lives. And that's something I want with that film, that I want to help people consider that they can slow down, or just to try to see how we can make our lives less focused on work and performance and success. So I think it's a good timing to because people are already with the people working from home, they realize that they can make things differently. So it's a good timing to think about what we want as a society and for the future of our children. Yeah.
Absolutely, a necessary punch in the face, isn't it? Jordan, what was your TIFF experience like? It was an online premiere.
Yeah, it's Kathleen points out, it's like a bizarre, you work on something for 5 years, plugging away, and then you're like, oh, the year it is out in the world is this year. But I think I would love to see both of your films, by the way. I feel like I would really get a lot out of them right now. But a lot of what you're saying, Kathleen, it's like this sort of, the pressure and like, the stuff you put on yourself about success and like getting into a festival and all that stuff, like it doesn't feel as potent or meaningful, anymore. I think that's something that I've certainly taken away from this pandemic time, is just, the things that I worried about and stressed over and like tortured myself over. It really doesn't matter. Getting into TIFF, whether you get really excited about it or really depressed about not getting in, and none of it really matters. It's very nice. And I think the thing I lament the most is not being able to experience it in a room with other people. But, it's just the sort of sheen of everything has just dulled a little bit, I guess, in the context of what's going on. But it was nice. I got to see a lot of movies from my living room. In terms of your question, though, like I do preface the film with anyone who's watching it, that's like, it is a real bummer. It's a bit of a bummer film. But, it very intentionally, and I hope this resonates with people, has a hopeful ending and has the ability to help people maybe have a bit of a catharsis. That's certainly what it does for me. But having made it 5 years ago and now in the context of the world, what resonates with me more, what stands out more, is like just how crucial human interaction is and human connection is, and how in this time where we have been so separated from everyone and so isolated and starved for human connection, you really need to find it where you can. And that can be as simple as, making eye contact with your neighbor when you go out to get your mail, or you know, or the simple touch of a stranger's hand on your shoulder. Like that, to me, I hope is what resonates at the end of the film, is just that human connection is possible in the least likely of places. And even though we are separated from the ones we want to be the closest to, we can still, you know, nourish that need for connection in other ways. And you know, this is certainly not something that would have occurred to me when I was making the film, but this is something Howie sort of pointed out, which is like, right now, you know, we should all be so lucky and grateful that we could be sitting at the side of a loved one who's dying and not kept out of the hospital or kept isolated from them. And so, you know, when I wrote this and when we made it, you know, it was the pain of that experience and having to sit there and go through that, and the waiting and the you know, all of those feelings. But now I do see it in a different context of like, yes, it is a painful experience that ultimately all of us will have to go through, but it is such a important and necessary, you know, necessary human experience. And to be able to be in proximity to our loved ones is a gift, I guess.
Yeah, I have to say, I just absolutely love the honesty of the end of that film, and just the compassion, because it could have gone so many different ways. And I don't want to say anything more because I don't want to make it, you know, spoil anything, but it's that honesty. And I feel like watching it in today's world, when people are losing loved ones without that kind of access, and I feel like it was just a really honest, difficult but honest ending. And for you, Robin, I guess that's kind of precisely, your film goes as far as it's talking about not being able to have been there. For Natalie, that was the struggle, and this very unusual ritual that has become her job, you know, a death doula.
Yep.
How do you think the film lives in for audiences right now? Like, I mean, it couldn't be more timely in a way.
Yeah, it's funny, Jordan, like there's a lot of parallels. It also took me 5 years to make this film, and it sounds like the themes are very similar too. And it's like things take on a whole new meaning now. And yeah, especially that, you know, it's about the kind of loss and disappearance of her sister, and like longing for somebody that you can't be close to, which is also a lot of what this moment is about. And then, you know, dealing with the fact that her sister was alone in her last moments, and that she was anxious and scared, you know, and how hard that was for her to deal with. And then, you know, I guess like how we can be kind of transformed by a heartbreak like that. And kind of, she found this calling through that experience of sitting with people and, you know, being supportive presence and comforting them. But yeah, I mean, now she's not doing any of that because people like that aren't allowed to be there in hospitals, right? So that, exactly, like the idea of closeness and separation right now is so central to what we're living through, you know? And then also this crazy synchronicity for me that, you know, at the beginning of this year, I got pregnant, and unexpectedly, and I have been living a whole other paradigm shift of my own here. And tonight this film is premiering, and I'm due to be giving birth in 2 days. So this idea of like passages in and out of the world, and I've been working with a doula, a birth doula, who's like really changed my whole perspective on the kind of like beauty and naturalness of the experience, and, you know, moving beyond like the kind of fear and trying to control things, which I think is very parallel to what Natalie's doing at the other end of life. You know, it's like if we really can let go and like breathe through it and look at the moment we're in, like how beautiful that passage can be. You know, I've been with friends in their last moments who have just done it with such grace that it was like some of the most incredible moments of my life, you know?
Well, beautiful note to end on. I guess we could end it here. I do wonder, I'd like to know what you're working on now, if you would like to share. I'd like to know how you're doing right now, if you'd like to share. Or what you hope your film will do out in the world this year, and well, I mean, in its life. You can answer any of those if you would like, or none of them.
I'm working on many projects. I have contracts, but I also keep time for my personal work. And I do have another idea for a short film. I don't know. I don't know yet where it's going to end, but I might work the idea as a book and a short film at the same time. So, but that's a really early idea, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah, I've got a bunch of, you know, pots on the stove that bubble away at different speeds. Who knows if and when any of them will turn into something, but I'm, you know, writing and working on features, and mostly the rest of this year is going to be taken up. I'm working on a TV show. We're doing 2 episodes of a new TV show here in Toronto. So I'll go to camera in a couple of weeks and basically work until mid-December. And then I hope Newfoundland will let me come back for Christmas. That's my hope and dream. So
you guys are going to be on set?
Yeah, I've been on set twice now since the reopening. Yeah, I shot an episode in Vancouver and one in Toronto.
Really?
Yeah, a lot of math.
Good to hear. Yeah, okay.
But it was okay. It's not too bad. Yeah, I think people should feel you know, film crews are very good at following rules, and it felt very safe and very regulated. So I think that provided we are allowed to continue working with the regulations that are set in place, I think it's possible. Even with a big lockdown again, I think that the industry could continue to function if we're allowed to. But it was safer than going into a grocery store. So
yeah, I believe you. And Robin, are you going to take time off and focus on your new creation?
I am, but I'm finishing that crazy ayahuasca film, very long-term labor of love, doctors working with ayahuasca. And I'm also developing a new feature doc related to psychedelic research, entheogens, and religious professionals taking psychedelics and how it changes their experience of God and the divine. But that one is going to be shooting all over the US, and with the pandemic, I mean, it's observational documentary, and we are hoping to capture some degree of normality in these religious communities. It's not all like people distancing with masks. So when that will be feasible or ever happen, I have no idea. But I plan to put the baby in a backpack and
get out there.
Gallivant around.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for this. It was really wonderful learning more about how you worked, and the films are fantastic. I wish them a long life, and hope you all do well out there too.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And good luck with the screening.
Thank
in
you.
10 minutes.